Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Liliana Gaspar, and this month's interview is with Deirdre Reddan, somebody that I've met through a very, very insightful webinar around food, weight, and disordered eating, and what you need to know as a coach and as a parent. Deirdre works with individuals who are having a problematic relationship with food, or with parents and family members of those struggled with disordered eating. She is passionate about helping people foster and role model a healthy relationship with food, weight, and body image, and helping them to flourish. So that's it. We've got lots of things in common, Deirdre. Thank you so much for accepting to do this interview for my social media and for my channel. Tell me a little bit more about the journey that has led you to work with this area of disordered eating.
Thanks, Liliana, and thank you very much for having me. It's a great opportunity to have a conversation on a topic that's very close to my own heart. So in terms of my own background, I'm actually a former banker. I worked in banking for 27 years and decided to change careers. Was always very interested in working with people and was probably informally coaching people and mentoring people in my previous life, because I would have always led large teams of people. So I decided to qualify as a coach. So I did the personal leadership and executive coaching diploma in Kingstown College. Really enjoyed the course, got an awful lot from it. And I suppose then when I kind of came to, when I was qualified, I was trying to figure out, you know, it was time for me to leave the corporate life behind me a bit. I wanted to change. And I have lived experience of eating disorders as a parent. And I guess even though we are now thankfully out the other side of that, my memory of that time was how isolating and lonely it is as a parent and how little support there is for parents in terms of helping them to understand what's going on for their loved one, and also helping them to understand how they can support their loved one on their recovery journey, because the more support a person can get, the quicker the recovery journey can be. So I guess I decided to put together the lived experience, the coaching experience, and then I went on and I did a master practitioner qualification from the National Centre for Eating Disorders in the UK. Just to kind of bolster the technical knowledge piece, and you know, very important that I had a broader understanding than just my own journey. So now what I do is I work with parents directly, helping them to help somebody who's struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder. I also work one-to-one with people who have a problematic relationship with food themselves. And I give talks on the topic as well around how to promote a positive relationship with food in the home. So for parents and carers, it's very important, the language that we use around food, both for ourselves and for people around us. And I have joined forces with a therapist, and we're running some programs for parents and professionals around eating disorders, because there is they're complex illnesses. There's a lot of stigma around them, and there's not a lot of medical training actually for medical professionals around eating disorders. So a lot of work to do, but it's something I'm very passionate about, I guess, and I do really enjoy it.
Yeah, most definitely. It's like you said, a lot of work to do, and there's a big need in the market for something like that, something different, and we'll come to that later. But a lot of the language, a lot of what we hear is actually sometimes not always helping people to deal with the challenges that they might be facing. But before we get into that, I just wanted to ask you, what is it that you see as disordered eating or a problematic relationship with food?
Sure. So I guess, you know, it's kind of like I do a lot of work in the mental health space as well. And it's all on a, you know, your mental health is on a continuum or a spectrum, and we all go through certain phases in life when you might go, you know, when things mightn't be as positive in a mental health context as they are at other times. And I suppose eating behaviors are similar. They're on a continuum as well. So if you were to kind of look at the spectrum, on the left-hand side, you would have, I'm not sure I agree with the term normal eating. I'm not sure any of us are normal eaters necessarily, but, you know, somebody who, food doesn't occupy a lot of their thoughts, doesn't occupy a lot of their time. There's somebody who will eat for enjoyment or for fun, or because, you know, they eat when they're hungry, they stop when they're full. They can eat, you know, as part of a celebration out in a restaurant. And it's just one part of life. It's not, it doesn't take over. And then I guess as you kind of start moving along that spectrum a little bit, you're more in the disordered eating space. So when you're there, you know, the relationship with food is just a little bit distorted. It occupies a lot more of your thoughts. You're focused a little bit more on exercising, maybe to offset what you've eaten. And you're trying to control, I suppose, a little bit more what you're eating. So it could be that you're on a diet, so you're restricting your food intake, or it could be that you're eating, maybe overeating. So you're kind of not, your relationship with food is just not quite right. And I suppose lots of us can go through times in life where we have disordered eating. So, for example, if you're studying for exams or you've suffered a bereavement, you know, your appetite goes and your eating patterns can be a little bit out of kilter. But in reality, I think about 33% of people will suffer from disordered eating at some point in their time, in their life. And then as you move kind of further over the spectrum, you're kind of into eating disorders. So that's where it becomes an obsession and a compulsion. You can't stop. So you can't stop yourself from overeating, or you can't eat. So there's something kind of restricting you from eating. Exercise becomes a compulsion and an obsession. And for somebody who's restricting, for example, so they could exercise when they're injured, no matter, every day, it doesn't matter. It's not done for pleasure. It's done because you have to do it, basically. So I suppose the differentiating factor really is the severity of the behaviors, if you like. So the more you move across the spectrum, it becomes more obsessive and compulsive, and they're kind of the indicators. So as I mentioned, 33% of people might have disordered eating. Eating disorders are clinically significant issues, and they're very complex. They have the highest mortality rate of any mental health illnesses, so they do need kind of proper and adequate help, you know, and people do need properly trained healthcare professionals to support them on that. But disordered eating is a lot more common than maybe people realize.
Yeah. And would it then make sense to say that, so I'm thinking of right now of the people out there who have heard you say disordered eating, going on a diet could be disordered eating, or exercising to compensate for what they've eaten could be disordered eating. And I imagine a lot of people out there, at least from my experience, who hear that are thinking, well, I thought those were normal things to do, and you know, everybody does them. So can you clarify, is there such a thing as modifying or restricting somehow your eating in a positive way, where it makes sense for whatever reason? You know, maybe I know that yesterday or during the holidays I've eaten too much, or I just want to compensate for that, for a matter of health, or how do you see that problematic? Because it can be complex.
Be very complex, Liliana, absolutely. And I suppose also, maybe to kind of put the spectrum piece into context a little bit more, it is really about the behaviors rather than the food. So the example I always use is an apple. And if you we all believe that an apple is a healthy food, and if you eat an apple a day, you keep the doctor away, to kind of use that old adage. But if that's all you're eating all day, that's clearly not a good relationship with food. So to answer your question, I suppose it's really about, sometimes it's kind of about the intent behind the behavior. So why are you doing it? I suppose where I'm coming from and the training I've done, I'm very much of, I'm not a believer in diets, I guess. I'm not sure that kind of following restrictive eating patterns is beneficial to anybody, and we can kind of discuss that in a little bit more detail. But maybe a simple rule of thumb is really, you know, how much space is it occupying in your mind?
Yeah.
So, you know, how focused are you on the restrictive eating or on following a diet? Is it a compulsion? Like, is it something that you really feel that you have to do? And similarly with the exercise, are you doing it because you enjoy movement? It makes you feel better. And generally, any kind of movement, rather than exercise that we do, it can kind of create serotonin in our brains and it makes us feel better. So are you doing it because you enjoy it, because you feel better, because it clears your head? Or are you doing it because you ate a bar of chocolate? And I suppose we all do that a little bit, you know. I mean, I know I did a marathon in 2019 and I probably went through, I know I did, you know, oh, well, I can have this now because I'm running and I'm running long distances. But it's about when it becomes kind of how much space it's taking up in your head, maybe is probably a good way of describing it.
And it makes sense perhaps as well to say not just how much space it takes in your head, but is it tied to your self-esteem?
100%. Yeah. So I suppose absolutely. You know, and if we were kind of to touch on the dieting piece briefly, you know, there are loads of reasons why diets aren't successful for people, and there's some of those are physiological in terms of our bodies. So the way our bodies are designed. You know, if we starve, it kind of goes back to sort of prehistoric times when there could have been famine. Our famines or difficulty in getting food. So the way our bodies are designed actually is that if we starve ourselves, which is really, you know, some diets kind of are in that space, and I might be making generalizations here, but if we do starve, if we restrict our food intake, our body goes into starvation mode, and then the next time it sees food, it kind of has to compensate for that, and it sort of wants to store up food for the next famine and the next kind of time period. So, you know, physiologically, they're not a good idea from that point of view. There were some studies done, the Minnesota starvation experiment that was done back in the 1930s. You might have heard of it, the Ansel Keys study, and that really found that you know, the negative impacts and kind of restricting your eating and the physical and psychological consequences. So it is really, it's all about, it's less about kind of restricting your eating, as you've said, and it's, as you've said very rightly, it really is about kind of looking at the person as a whole. So I suppose one thing you and I do as coaches is, you know, when we work with somebody, we look at the whole person. So similarly, if somebody you know, has a relationship with food that maybe isn't quite right, it is all about looking at the component parts of that person. So why are they using food? Maybe to manage their emotions or their feelings. What else is going on underneath that? And, you know, rather than kind of focusing, and this is a personal view, sorry, Liliana, obviously, but rather than focusing on following diets that are designed to fail for a whole host of reasons, perhaps it's better to kind of look at trying to make that person happier and healthier in themselves, and looking at behaviors maybe that can be changed. And sometimes, you know, if you can transform your relationship with food, you can, it may be that there is weight loss as part of that journey or at the end of that journey. But for some people, it may not translate to weight loss, but they may be happier in their lives and their self-esteem, as you rightly said. They might be in a better place within themselves. And, you know, no more than you can't tell whether somebody has an eating disorder by looking at them. Similarly, you can't tell how healthy somebody is by looking at them. So we are very much in a culture where thin is ideal, and, you know, we kind of idolize culturally people who are, you know, so the women have to be thin and the men have to be muscular and you know, have this body shape. But the reality is you could have somebody who is very thin, who eats a very poor diet, so they're not eating a nutritionally dense diet, they're not exercising, and you could have somebody else who maybe is not of that thin shape, maybe of larger size, but is doing all the right things and is actually much healthier. So I think, there's a lot of there's diet culture issues, and there's kind of our own cultural perceptions around what a body should look like that are flawed.
Yes, very interesting. And what you were saying there as well ties very well to the next question that I was going to ask, which is, this is the time of the year when a lot of people are making New Year resolutions or setting goals for the year. And I was doing a little bit of research around that topic, and it happened. I came across a few surveys, and it seems that exercising or going on a diet or losing weight is at the top, tends to be one of the first things that people think of and people put on their lists. So what are your thoughts around that? I know you've mentioned what your thinking is around diet, what something I've heard you call before the diet culture. But is there anything else that you would add in this context of the New Year resolutions?
Yeah, I think and I think it's kind of a trap we all fall into, isn't it? Like, this year we're going to be, better versions of ourselves, and we can do that without changing how we look, or what we eat. So again, resolutions tend to be, even though we think there's something that might improve us, inverted commas, they tend to be negative. They tend to be negative things in nature. So I'm going to stop eating cake, or I'm going to work out like way more than I've ever done before. So in lots of ways, they're kind of coming from a negative place almost. So we're in lots of cases we do set ourselves up for failure, because we might set, the targets might be too extreme or too ambitious. And it's like we're punishing ourselves. I'm going to exercise a lot, or I'm going to eat less. I heard somebody on the radio here the other day, a psychologist, talk about them, and he said that, he said that he doesn't drink a lot anyway, but his New Year's resolution was to drink better wine. So drink better quality wine, but drink less of it. So it's, I suppose, if you can reframe them again, into things that are more positive, and it's all about small steps. And I think that's half the problem with these sometimes, that you start off with a big bang on the 1st of January, and January is a really difficult month for everybody anyway. The weather tends to be not great, and everybody's broke after Christmas, and we set ourselves targets that aren't realistic, and then we fail, and then we beat ourselves up because we have failed. So it's maybe, if we could look at making small little changes in our lives, little things that we can build on, and that are positive in intent. So, we know from neuroscience how the brain is wired. It takes 5 positives, I think, to overcome a negative. So if we're going to have the negative self-talk all the time, we're kind of doomed for failure. So it is really about making a really small little change. It could be, if you want to get a little bit more movement, 5-minute walk every day. Maybe building into your normal nutritional intake. I won't use the word diet. That you have more, the things that help fuel your body, so more nutrition dense foods, or whatever the case may be. But it is really about small changes, and it is really about doing something nice for you, I think, rather than punishing yourself. And sometimes people who struggle with their relationship with food, have a lot of negative self-talk going on. They tend to describe themselves, if you were to ask somebody, no matter what end of the spectrum they're on, whether it's undereating or overeating, they would always describe themselves as kind, but they're not so good at being kind to themselves. So maybe a lot of it is about kind of building up your own sense of self, and doing little bits of self-care acts for yourself. Again, little things, because again, I suppose the whole thing about self-care, we can set ourselves up for failure there too, and say, oh, I'm going to do all these beautiful things for myself, not get the time to do them, and then we think, oh, there's something else I have failed at. And again, people who sometimes, you know, struggle with their relationship with food, suffer a little bit from sort of all or nothing thinking, you know, so they can be very black and white. They can be very perfectionistic, and they want things to be perfect. And again, then if you can't follow the diet, or whatever it is, then feel, oh, I've blown it.
Exactly.
You know, so that can kind of lead to other maybe, or reverting back to other difficulties around behaviors around food. But there's so much you can do in the kind of behavioral change area to kind of boost, I suppose, you know, in the work I do around eating disorders, I use this metaphor that I borrowed from somebody else, and it's that you have a red balloon and a blue balloon. So the red balloon is all the, you know, if it's an eating disorder, for example, and the blue balloon is the person and all of the things that are good about the person. So when you're working with somebody to address an eating disorder, or with the parents, you're very much trying to shrink the red balloon and you're trying to blow up the blue balloon. So all the good things about the person, their strengths, the things that they really enjoy in life, their values. So it's the same principle. So I suppose instead of focusing on the diet, which could be your red balloon, you focus on everything else.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And it actually reminds me of one aspect that I've come across in my work with clients, which is oftentimes when I ask my clients questions around who they are, or what their biggest desires are, or anything to do with identity or purpose, or yeah, the wish that they have for life or for themselves, they often don't know how to, they don't know what to say to that. Sometimes there's this, it's almost like they're not used to paying attention to themselves, and to what they want and what they love about themselves. And they're very focused, and this connects with what you were saying around being kind, on what others want, what others need. And in the process, to me, it seems like it becomes very difficult to, at the end, self-regulate when you don't know who you are, when you don't know what's good for you, when you don't have a sense of self.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's kind of, you know, and I suppose as coaches, that's a lot of what we do, isn't it? We kind of walk with clients on the journey of discovery about themselves and what it is they want from life. And it's similar. It is similar, but I suppose it is very similar. But it's like as if these obstacles have popped up along the way, and it could be around food, or dieting or whatever, you know, and that creates a sense of failure sometimes. So it's very much about kind of dealing with each of those obstacles along the way, and coming up with strategies and problem solving. So, you know, there was a study done in the US a number of years ago around kind of looking at people who had successfully maintained weight loss. And I think typically 95 to 96% of people don't sustain weight loss. But some of the findings in that study were around planning and problem solving. So people who kind of plan, kind of identify the potential obstacles, come up with a strategy around how to surmount those. They nearly always have breakfast. Actually, they consider that to be very important, and that they don't necessarily have a weight loss goal. So it's all about kind of doing activity or movement that they enjoy, and planning and problem solving are kind of some of the key factors. So it's very much similar to what you were saying, Liliana, around the building the self-esteem, identifying the goal, and what's important to the person, and kind of having that discovery journey, if you like, in terms of understanding what their values are, what their strengths are, what are the things that they're really good at. And there's an awful lot of very nice, easy work that people can do around promoting that sense of self-esteem, whether that, you know, that you'd be very familiar with as well, in terms of gratitude journaling, or identifying your strengths, or, you know, even taking 5 minutes at the end of the day and thinking about, well, was there one thing that I did today that I approve of about myself? and another one, and kind of just building your repository, I suppose, of
Yeah.
positive things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was actually suggesting the other day I was writing a blog article, and I was actually suggesting before people go into any New Year planning or resolutions that they stop to acknowledge how far they've come, and all their achievements and what their strengths are. And I feel that instinctively makes you want to protect that. And you're less likely to then come up with goals that will disrupt this balance, that will be a form of self-rejection, or, because you come to love yourself and feel a bit more comfortable in your skin. So you kind of want to add that, and it kind of shifts your mindset to a more positive one. You might find out you don't need any New Year goals or resolutions because you're fine the way you are.
And I think sometimes it can be really helpful. A nice little thing to do that I've started doing myself is, even in your diary, just on a Friday, take 5 minutes to kind of reflect back in the week and think about 3 things that that went well for you that week. Kind of 3 wins or something you've learned, in the week. And in the work that I do with parents particularly, and similarly with directly with individuals, it's nice to kind of have a little positive success journal, because you will always, again, back to how the brain is wired, it always focuses on the negative. It's nice to, whether you do it in your diary or you do it in a little notebook, just to write the things that have gone well. And it can be something really, really small, but something always goes well in the week, and it's so that the day, and if you're a parent who's supporting a child through, on a difficult journey with an eating disorder, there's always something small that's good in the week. And it's nice when you have a day when maybe you're a bit despondent, that you can look back on that, and absolutely exactly what you said about having a record of the journey and being able to see the progress that you've made, because you can't forget how far you've come.
Yeah. Now, shifting gears slightly, one of the challenges to improving relationship with food that people that I've come across mention often is that the family or the people that they live with have a lot of influence, and that it becomes really difficult for you to do the right thing when people around you are not eating perhaps the best way, nourishing, healthy foods, or maybe they have to, the burden of cooking falls on them. And if they were to cook something only for themselves, they would be able to make healthier choices. But once the family is involved, they kind of feel like they have to, satisfy their needs, and, it creates conflict sometimes. I've even had clients tell me that if they make a healthy choice, some members of the family will almost make fun of them or make them feel bad for trying to be healthy. So because you work with parents, so you have an insight on what happens in families sometimes, and I'm just curious about your perspective on that.
Okay, so a couple of things I suppose I would say on that. So as we talked earlier about kind of self-esteem and the need maybe to boost self-esteem, in the work that I do, they're often, and back to the kindness piece and people being kind to others and not kind to themselves, it's very important often to do some assertiveness training so that people learn how to speak up for themselves, because people who tend to be people pleasers are not good maybe at kind of saying I want, and I need, and this is what I need. So there is certainly stuff you can do kind of around that, around assertiveness. A lot of the work that I would do, we do look at that. And a lot of it too is looking at problem solving, and coming up, maybe exploring the issues a little bit more. And, because sometimes it can be an excuse, to be honest, so like deep down, the person knows what they need to do, but maybe it suits them. And that might be a bit harsh, but maybe it suits them to say, well, my family won't eat healthy food, So it's sometimes it can be just worth exploring that with the person and understanding that a little bit more and coming up with strategies, you know, around it. So to your point about the assertiveness, you know, that somebody would be criticized for eating healthy food, they need to kind of learn to say, well, actually, no, this is what I need and this is what I'm having. And, you know, it can be really challenging to deal with what you would call food pushers. So people who encourage you to keep eating the food that, you know, that you have been eating in the past. So it is all about learning and developing the skills to kind of tackle those individuals and take them on. And it can be, you know, lots of things can be helpful. So it's really an awful lot of this, and anybody can transform their relationship with food. It's very possible. I think that's really important. You know, no more than recovery is always possible from an eating disorder. People can transform their relationship with food. It's absolutely possible. And a lot of it is really just about trying different things out and trying to see, you know, there isn't, unfortunately, there is no magic formula here, but there are lots of things that you can try and just see what works for you. So it's all about solving problems. So it can be little things like, for example, you know, encourage planning and problem solving. So for example, when you buy petrol, when do you buy petrol? So if you buy petrol on the way home from work, and now I know lots of people are working from home, but if you buy petrol on the way home from work in the evening, you're far more likely to be hungry and you're far more likely to pick something up to eat that may not be healthy. If you go and buy your petrol in the morning after you've had your breakfast, you're less likely to be hungry. So and you're less likely then to kind of pick up the bar of chocolate. So it's all about kind of planning a lot of that. It's also about educating and for people to understand. So it could be, for example, that you could have a couple and maybe the lady is working with yourself, Liliana, and is kind of keen to improve her relationship with food. But her partner, you know, insists on getting takeaways a couple of nights a week or whatever the case may be. And it may be that the partner needs to come to a session with you to understand really what's going on, you know, and figure out and understand how important it is to the partner and understand how they can support. So there's a mix of things. There's, you know, the assertiveness skills, there's the problem solving and the planning, and then sometimes it is about trying to bring the family and the partner on board. And there's a lot you can do within the home about, you know, changing our emotional relationship with food, because we all have an emotional relationship with food. We use emotions to describe food, you know, like it's good food or it's a treat or it's a reward. So there's a lot that we can do to kind of change that behavior. And food at the end of the day is actually just food. It's not good, it's not bad, and it shouldn't be kind of used in that context. And I suppose the other piece I would add to that is, you know, we all grow up with the food script. So as kids, we all grew up with a script around food in the home. So, you know, it could have been that we weren't allowed to get up from the table until we had cleared our plate, or whatever the case may be. And that can kind of carry with us. So sometimes when you're doing some work around the relationship with food, we need to explore that a little bit and understand our own values around food and kind of how we eat and what we eat. So I hope that sort of answers the question.
Yes, exactly. It does, absolutely. And there's kind of two things that I'm thinking that came to mind as you were describing. So one of the things is when you touch on problem solving and exploring the options, it reminds me of how a lot of the times I notice that some of the people who are struggling, or a lot of them who are struggling with relationship with food, are in a place of powerlessness, where for every solution there's a problem. So you can notice that as you are speaking with people, that as you try to explore options, they say, oh yes, but then this is going to happen and I can never do this because this or that. So it's coming out of that place of, or noticing first in yourself that your mind is so used to looking at the problem and all the things that stop you from achieving something, that it's like a cloud that it doesn't allow you to see the actual options. You usually have a lot more power to change your situation than you realize, especially because a lot of it starts with simple things, very small things like the ones you were describing. And I'm going to mention the second thing, even though it's slightly different, but I was also thinking how the same way that we look at the individual as a whole, in order to address the aspects around food. And we kind of notice that the problems around food, maybe whatever they're eating, the relationship with food might be a symptom of something else. And I think in the context of families, often it is the same thing. So the conversations, the difficult, but let's say the conflicts, although it may not always be a big open conflict, but the attrition that exists around food is sometimes a sign of something else, that maybe needs to be improved in the way that people communicate with each other, in how they respect each other. So maybe there's something else at the deeper level that needs to be addressed.
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps. And so it's about food and it's not about food, you know, or it's about more than just food. It's about feelings too. And it can be for some people that they do need to make changes in their life. And it may be that they need to change their friends. You know, it can be that far reaching if they want to make those deep changes that the friends are maybe not good influences on them and are food pushers, as I mentioned before. So yes, it can be, and you know, I would find in my work with eating disorders that a lot of the parents have challenging relationships with food themselves. So you know, genetics play a big part on all of this, and they're not predictors. They're not causal, like it just because the genes are against you, or you know there's a genetic disposition, doesn't mean you'll automatically develop an issue. But there can be links, I suppose, in terms of behaviours around food and the language we use around food, and you know, not having. So you could have, for example, you know, if you have a family where they never let sweets in the house, what's going to happen to that child when they go somewhere that they can get access to sweets? You know, so our behaviours can actually have an impact. But I suppose on the flip side as well, there's an awful lot of, you know, simple things that we can do. So I learned recently and was horrified that in the UK, some of the furniture manufacturers have stopped making tables because people are no longer buying tables. So in their houses, they actually don't have a dinner table. Okay. So it has been there's been lots of surveys done, and there's lots of evidence to suggest that if you sit and eat in front of the TV, and if you're snacking in front of the TV, you will eat 3 times as much because you're actually in sort of a trance-like state. So it's never good to eat in front of the TV. So little kind of small behavior changes, you know, where you're eating at the table, where you eat together as a family, they're all kind of positive behaviors. Where you can be a little bit more mindful about what you're eating as well. So eating on the go is never good because your brain won't actually recognize that you've eaten. The connection just doesn't work. So you know, you won't feel satisfied or full. So it's always important to eat sitting down. So some of these things can be, some of them are absolutely, as you said, like around building self-esteem and you know, working on the emotional side, but some of them are actually quite practical and simple things as well.
Yeah, fascinating. And we could spend the rest of the day talking about these things. There's so much more that that came to mind as we were speaking, but I think that we've covered most of the, I suppose, the significant things that would be important for people to retain in this beginning of the year, that they try and shift their focus more to being happy and healthy. It's what I normally say, but to focus on to the positives, to themselves, to the value that they have, and let the relationship with food be a function and a reflex of that, rather than something that we use to try and compensate for things that we don't think are working very well. I'm curious, as a final question, if there was only one thing that you would want people to retain from all of the things that we've said today, what do you think that would be?
There is always hope.
Yeah.
So there is always hope, you know, that you can make changes, sustainable changes, that will have a positive impact on you and on your health, and on your happiness. So if you are somebody who, I suppose, just, you know, something to think about, like if you're somebody who, it's sort of in chaos in terms of how you eat. So you know, you could be on a diet, so you're restricting, and then you come off the diet and you compensate for the diet. That actually has an impact on your mood. So you know, and how you feel. So the serotonin, which creates, and dopamine, which creates all the good thoughts in your brain, they're not produced to the same extent if you're kind of going yo-yoing, I suppose, in terms of what you're eating. To kind of use the phrase yo-yo diet. So, you know, even kind of stabilizing your nutrition, intake, making sure that you're eating nutritionally dense foods can actually make you feel better. It can actually improve your mood. So a lot of the time when you're not fueling your body, or you could be eating a lot, but it's not the right foods, and you need all foods. You need fats, you need carbs, you need proteins. But if you're not eating kind of the complex carbs and the nutritionally dense foods, you're on sort of a roller coaster in terms of your blood glucose and also your emotions. So sometimes by actually stabilizing your food intake, eating regularly and eating the right types of foods and the superfoods and the good veg, you know, I don't like using the word good, but, you know, veg and fruit that are give you good vitamins and stuff, you can actually improve your mood. So surely that's worth doing in terms of making you feel better. It's a very easy thing to do in lots of ways to make you feel better. But it's like life is a journey, I suppose. And you know, if somebody is struggling with their relationship with food, there's so much they can do. Little steps. You know, it's a journey of 1,000 steps, I guess. But there's always hope that you can actually transform that relationship with food. And as parents, we are role models for our children, and they will do what we do, not do what we say. So it's very important too that we kind of preserve the sanctity of that relationship for our children, as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Deirdre. It's been great to have you for this little bit of time and to hear your insights. How can people find you if they want to learn more about the work that you do?
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me, Liliana, because it's really important. I'm really pleased to see people like yourself kind of doing the same sort of work that I do. And I think it's so necessary and needed. And I think as coaches, we're ideally suited in lots of ways to this work. You know, it's all about moving forward. And I think coaching is all about creating positive behavioral changes. So I think it's fantastic to see the likes of yourself doing the work similar to me. So I just really wanted to say that. In terms of how people can find me on LinkedIn, just under my own name, Deirdre Reddan. My email is Deirdre Reddan, all one word, and it's REDDAN @gmail.com. And in terms of the work that I do around eating disorders, with my colleague, we're Supported Families on Instagram and Facebook, and we run some programs for parents on that particular area as well.
Okay, so we'll leave all the relevant links in the comments section or in some description section of wherever this video is going to be shared. And thanks again. Thank you so much. I look forward to looking at the rest of continue to look at the work that you've been doing and collaborate and have these conversations with you.
Great. Thanks very much, Liliana. My pleasure.